Hello, welcome to the Brooklyn Minds webinar series. Today we're discussing the impact of the pandemic on individuals with autism spectrum disorders. My name is Carlene MacMillan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Brooklyn Minds, and I'll be your moderator. We're a comprehensive mental health and deep TMS treatment center based in New York City. We specialize in treating high acuity patients as a team. Joining us today is one of our team members, Jacob Lichtman, who's completing his practicum at Brooklyn Minds. Jacob works as an applied behavioral analysis certified registered behavior technician, utilizing behavioral therapy with individuals on the autism spectrum. Jacob has experience working with children and young adults with disorders such as autism spectrum, ADHD, and oppositional defiant disorder. Also with us today is Brendan Wolff, who's the founder of Allied Achievement and is the head of school at Achievement Unlocked. Achievement Unlocked is a unique neurodiversity positive educational environment designed explicitly to meet the needs of students who are not thriving in more traditional school settings. And finally on the panel today, we have Michael Gilberg. Michael's an attorney specializing in special education and disability rights law, who also brings his perspective as a person on the autism spectrum. I'm so excited to begin the conversation with these three gentlemen, and I hope you will participate by submitting your questions via chat throughout our time. Before we begin, just a reminder, the content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your mental health professional or other qualified provider with any questions you may have regarding your condition. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Carlene.
Thank you.
So we're gonna dive right in. So this question is for everyone. What has been the most challenging aspect of working with kids on the spectrum and their families in the pandemic? Brendan, maybe you could start us off.
I think that, in so many ways, like our toolkit has been limited in what we're able to do for families. It's something that I've been telling ever since the beginning, like we had before the school and the home environment, and now we're operating in this brand new environment where we sort of have to start from scratch and figure out what being in this situation means for our students so that we can respond accordingly to the things that they need. Something we were talking about before we started the broadcast was having the video on and off. A lot of my students, it's very frustrating to a teacher to have to teach an audience that you can't see. But a lot of the students really don't feel comfortable seeing themselves on the screen or knowing that they're being taped. And it definitely, it takes a mental leap in order to, because seeing the kid, that's for you. They need to be able to be there in a way that they can participate meaningfully. So just adjusting our expectations, I think, would be the biggest challenge for what we're doing to meet our kids like we want to do, where they're at.
Mm-hmm. Which is this new frontier, this sort of third dimension of this not work, not school, not home, new space. I really like that concept. Michael, how about for you? What are you seeing in the clients that you're working with?
Well, I mean, it's hard to get new clients right now because of the economic uncertainty families, are facing during this time, with a lot of people being furloughed or laid off from jobs. But my existing clients who already were having challenges with their education, because I represent families with children with disabilities who are not getting what they feel are the appropriate educational services. So that's now compounded by the distance learning, especially for kids, as Brendan said, who are already difficult time learning. They don't want to necessarily do it by video. They don't want to see themselves on video, and they have social skills issues. So that's compounded by being over video, especially when they're young and they're not able to access the technology on their own. And their parents, who are trying to do their jobs, do what they have to do with their lives, have to help them. And the problem is also not every parent is trained to do this. And so the parents are taking on a lot more of the burden than they normally would.
Mm-hmm. Right. I would say most parents are not trained professional teachers, and all of a sudden they have this, this new occupation.
It's a new job for the parents, and the parents, again, as I always say, being a parent is one of the most important jobs there is, and one of the only ones you don't need a license for.
Jacob, how about for you? I know you've been continuing to do the ABA therapy with folks.
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge I think parents are experiencing on different realms is the fact that the school system is not in place. The school system for kids who have autism serves as a place of structure, and it serves as the biggest sort of rock of support because they're in school for most of the day. These kids have after-school programs. There's so much support they receive in school. Even their therapies, for the most part, happen at school. So suddenly that system falling apart is an incredible challenge to parents. Um, Another piece is the fact that structure is so important for parents. Schools have a system. They come in the morning, there's probably breakfast, there's certain lessons in the morning, certain in the afternoon. Kids who are on the spectrum need that kind of structure. They need this predictability. And parents who work especially, and even who don't, who have other kids, cannot be confined to such a structure as much as they try. And in addition to that, my kids that I'm working with are, like I would say on the top, a higher end of the spectrum. So they're pretty functional. And what we do is skill-based. So we work on all these skills with them. We achieve a certain threshold, and then suddenly this happens, and they can almost, many of them could fall back and did fall back in different areas. So that sudden stop to these skills that we were trying to teach them. So it's like three factors that I would say to sum it up.
Right. So, yeah, and I think we hear certainly a lot in the news about all the stressors with distance learning, but I also want to task you guys with talking a little bit about some of the positive or unexpected developments that you've seen with this new kind of learning. Again, maybe Brendan, you could go first because I know you're doing some really interesting things.
I am so ready to jump on that.
Yeah, thought you would be.
It comes down to a lot of like what Jacob said is completely right. Like it's structure. Adults need structure. Our kids need structure even more explicitly. Like the matter of how explicit the structure is really the only continuum that we're operating at. So this has been a really unique opportunity from our end in a couple of ways. It feels weird to say unique opportunity, but when you're in a situation like this, you really have to seize the benefits wherever you can. And I can say unequivocally that I have never had such a good opportunity in my career to teach calendar skills. So our students are grades 2 to 8, and so slightly older than the kids that Jacob is working with. Same need for structure, obviously. So a lot of what we've done is make everything dependent on, communicate all of the school structures through Google Calendar. Like they're used to having a schedule, but now that schedule lives in a way that is far more generalizable than it would have been in any other context. And we're teaching them, we use a couple of services to set up meetings, and our students are able to request office hours with us. So we're teaching them modern technological self-advocacy and scheduling things that can last forever. And the other major benefit has been, I think this has been a time of reflection for everyone, and as we're forced into close proximity with each other. And so one major thing we've been doing is 15-minute check-ins with families every week. And I honestly have seen some amazing results from that. Just 15 minutes a week, every week, talking to the families. It's really based around 3 questions. We'll put small changes in place, and those small changes add up to more sanity to go around.
Mm-hmm. And can I just ask, kind of prior to the pandemic, how often would you have those touch points with parents typically?
Fairly regularly, but it was, I will totally cop to being less rigorous in the structure. We made sure that it wasn't the squeaky wheels that got all the grease, but no one really had the time to do 15 minutes or the incentive really to do 15-minute check-ins, because a lot of what was necessary was being handled by the school. Now everything is so much more imminent.
I understand in more traditional public schools as well, the teachers are being tasked with doing more of these one-on-ones with the parents. So I think that's can be so helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazingly helpful. I know some places actually do the inverse, and they're not allowing parent contact or highly regulating it. Unfortunately, I think communication is one of the biggest things we need to emphasize.
Absolutely, absolutely. Michael or Jacob, any comments on sort of positive developments for your work during this time?
Well, I think positive is hard. I mean, from where I sit, I only deal with complaints. I'm not getting parents coming to me because they're happy with their child's education. I mean, in a positive, it creates more work for me. That's not necessarily a good thing, except for me. But I think on a positive, it's given the schools or the parents chances to look at some different things. And one thing I found that's an indirect positive is that kids who we're trying to get out of the public school and put them into a more individualized, smaller environment, one-on-one. What we're finding is in certain ways they're doing better at home with that smaller, more individualized environment. And it's showing that behaviors that exist in the larger classroom setting are not appearing, and that this is possibly a better setting for them. Even though it's home, it's not a school. It's making some of those cases a little more obvious that these kids need that smaller environment with less stimuli.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that once this is over, that will translate into really different looking educational plans for them, or?
Ideally, but unfortunately, it's going to come down to money, which it always does. And the
Mm-hmm.
problem is right now, schools are having a lot of budgetary issues because of lack of support from the federal government for their budgets.
Yeah. Yeah. Jacob, what about for you and your work?
I'm noticing a lot of benefits. So one is the fact that being with a child over a video camera, as distracting as it might seem, actually is less distracting because there is no toys or activities like pens, pencils to be distracted by, because they constantly look at you at the screen, and everything we do is on that screen. So it's beautiful that there is in some way more attention to the lesson that I am doing with them. Another positive is that I actually get to generalize a lot of skills that I really wanted to generalize because it's at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I see them in their natural habitat. I see them in their environment. And a lot of ABA is to generalize skills. In addition to that is getting the parents to learn skills, getting the parents more involved, which sometimes seems like unreachable, but given the situation, they have to be. They're almost like forced to learn what we do and implement them. So those are a lot of benefits that I've seen switching over to video services.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think one of the things that came up in our sort of pre-planning discussion was also this role of parents and privacy that can come up. So when you're trying to work with kids, kind of how are you handling being alone with them, parents wanting to be involved, parents needing to be involved, and just kind of navigating in a shared space. Maybe Brendan, you could comment a little on that.
So one of the first recommendations I gave to all of our parents was, first and foremost, take a step back. It is really hard to watch, at least for many of our students, it's very hard for the parents to watch their kids not succeed. And failure is a huge part of learning. No one can really contest that, but the mistakes that the students make are sometimes difficult for parents to deal with. But I have felt that it is important that even though we can't really separate school and home right now, we do the best we can. And wherever possible, we ask parents to let us try to handle it as much as we can. And we sort of pair that with massive amounts of communication with the parents, which is really, I think, the strength of why we were able to make the shift so easily. We have had ongoing communication in the form of Slack, which is an app. You're not familiar with it as you think of an instant messaging client meant for a company. That's what you get, IRC on steroids.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And your families are on there. Were they on there before the pandemic, and it's just you've seen it become kind of more active?
So given the population that we work with, communication is incredibly essential. So it's always been sort of our cornerstone.
Mm-hmm.
And that really served us well when we made the transition. But I will tell you that the communication is definitely upticked. They can get at us anytime, night or day. This is completely apart from like the check-ins, but I think the biggest part of communication, not the biggest part, but like a major part of communication has been being able to tell parents, this thing that you're seeing right now, this is okay. This is normal. We know how to handle this. You don't have to.
Mm-hmm. Anyone want to chime in on that as well, or?
Well, I think I shared the story with you during our prep session about a case where a 6-year-old child needed to be in a group session, but there needed to be privacy, but the mother couldn't leave him alone because he couldn't operate the computer on his own without getting angry and possibly breaking the computer.
Mm-hmm.
So we came up with a solution of giving the child headphones. And this way the mother doesn't hear what's done, but she can sit in the room with him.
Mm-hmm. And that worked out well, that kind of accommodation.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's that sort of kind of thinking out of the box for these new scenarios. I know with some of my clients, I have them use white noise on their phone and put it outside their room so that they can have some privacy for their therapy. So yeah. So Michael, I have a question for you, and this stems from, things I think parents are asking me in my work. So what should families kind of know about their educational rights during a time like this? And also what can they realistically expect in terms of accommodations and things that were in place pre-pandemic?
So what parents need to know is no rights have been waived during the pandemic. None of the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is the law governing special education, has been waived. There's been requests from the National School Districts Association or the National Professional Superintendents to waive it so that the school districts will be absolved of less responsibility. But at this point, nothing is waived. COPA, which is the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates, which is the national professional group of attorneys and advocates representing families, which I'm on the board of, has lobbied very effectively to make sure that IDEA provisions have not been waived. So all the rights legally that exist during the non-pandemic times exist now. So the schools are still obligated to give the kids a free and appropriate public education, whatever appropriate is for that child, all their related services, in a way that is appropriate. Like I said to some people, I've heard of schools trying to do speech and language services by mail, and you can't tell if a kid is speaking properly with a worksheet.
Oh my gosh, wow.
And again, a worksheet, how do you tell if the kid's pronouncing things right? You can't.
Wow.
So nothing's been waived. All the same rules apply. Unfortunately, the problem is that it's hard to say to a school, you have to do this, and because of the pandemic, and that the school isn't responsible for the pandemic, but they still have an obligation. So a lot of them are figuring things as they go. There's a question of whether the schools are obligated to give the students the technology necessary if the family doesn't possess technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of technology, actually, Jacob, I know in your work you work with a number of members of the Orthodox and Hasidic communities, many of whom kind of at baseline are really not particularly involved with technology. Can you talk a little bit about how that transition has been?
It's actually interesting. So in the beginning, when we started out, we were like very concerned how it's going to go down. Will parents be okay to shift over to an iPad, something they usually would not let their kids use? Astonishingly, most parents agreed to have their kids use iPads. And like Michael just said, in terms of school systems providing technology, a lot of the agencies provide iPads and other forms of tablets to be able to do these services. So it was definitely a challenge in the beginning. I remember some parents telling me, no, I would never let my child do such a thing. We never did it. We don't believe in it. But given the constraints to the situation, they slowly let their kids use it, and they saw the benefits of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this concept of screen time, like what does it even mean anymore, right? This focus on number of hours per day, like what do we do with that, right?
Right, and what Jacob's saying about them providing technology from agencies, I think that happens more in New York City and other urban areas. I've seen in some of the smaller school districts in more suburban and rural areas where there might not be as much money, a little more resistance to potentially providing that technology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I kind of wonder in those situations I mean, we have a policy at AU about like every student gets a Chromebook, and then like written into the contract, we actually have like the thing where if your kid breaks a Chromebook, we're going to replace the first one and like don't even worry about it, because they're cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Like for the cost of one iPad, you can get 10 Chromebooks. So I think sometimes we do need to go for quantity over quality when it comes to provisioning students with electronics. I know
Oh, sorry.
I basically like made it clear to all of the parents that like I would go to the school, I would get the Chromebooks, and if anyone needed one, we would make sure that they had the tech that they needed to have access.
Mm-hmm.
And Brendan's right, and I see this in a lot of schools where they'll buy the Chromebooks in bulk because you can buy 100 or 1,000 or whatever Chromebooks at a really cheap rate.
Right, right.
Even if you're buying them individually, they're $100 a piece. Like you're not looking for top of the line technology. You're looking for something that can handle a distance learning tech and word processing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I have a friend who's the teacher in the city, and she was saying the principal of her school was driving around on his bicycle, dropping off devices at kids' homes just to make this work. So I do think a lot of teachers are really kind of going above and beyond here. Maybe Brendan, could you talk a little bit about that? And I know you have teachers that work with you, and how are they doing with all this?
They are saints in my mind. Because like I mean everyone knows but doesn't really like talk about the fact that the average teacher has a work day that appears the shortest out of anyone but is actually the longest.
Mm-hmm.
And distance learning, having to take everything, we have an amazing math teacher who has all of these like games on hand and prepared kids engage all the time. Having to turn that all online is a lot of work. And she was still probably the most prepared out of any of us. So it's definitely extended the workday. But at the same time, we're all here because we care a lot about these kids. And sorry, I got distracted by something in the corner of my eye. But we care a lot about these kids, and so we built a really strong system of support in for the kids, like starting with doing live classes from 9 to 12 every day. So students, Jacob mentioned structure earlier and how important it is. And really going into this, we're like, how much of the school can we maintain for the kids so that they will have that sense of normalcy that they need and require, honestly, to function at optimal levels.
Mm-hmm.
So all our students, we normally have 4 periods in the morning. Our students are maintaining their normal academic schedules. We've had to get a little creative with regards to enrichments, which we normally do in the afternoon. We have a social lunchroom, which is just a Zoom room that the kids can come and chat and eat. We have, and every day we're offering a choice of 3 enrichments in the afternoon, and students are using Google Forms to send that stuff in and then doing it back. I think the biggest change, do I have permission to draw something?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think we can see it. I think we can see you here.
Don't worry, I'm a terrible artist. But like we, so on the one end, like one of the most important things has been establishing, I'm gonna have to change markers. On the one end, one of the most important things has been establishing classroom teams, right? So you have 3 people like working together. Currently we have a lead teacher and 2 support staff in each classroom. So a group of 5, 6 students, 7 in one extreme case. Like we're at a huge distance from a student. So we essentially have been trying to extend the classroom as much as possible through what we're calling the feedback fish, which is that the student sends an email to one of the team members, puts it on Google Drive with the work submitted. Someone will then respond to the student with feedback, which the student then reads and responds and then can resend back to us.
Nice.
And yeah, that doesn't actually symbolize anything, but it makes it look more like a fish because apparently some of my lines didn't come out great.
Yeah, no, we definitely see the fish swimming there. That's great. And the kids know about the feedback fish too. This isn't just like an internal thing. This is something.
No, the parents know about the feedback fish.
That's great.
But you know, when the limitations of the classroom are such that like we really need to extend what we're doing beyond just the instructional time in the same way that we would extend beyond it in the classroom, except in a different way because we can't do any of those things anymore.
Yeah.
And I think finding ways to engage with the students novelly, and I could talk more later about like the social emotional component and how we need that engagement to keep doing that development. But yeah.
I know in terms of also technology that you're involved in, is that you have Slack, but you mentioned to me something like Twitch. Like I vaguely know what that is. Can you explain to our audience kind of what you guys are doing on Twitch? And
I think you're mixing up Twitch with Discord.
Discord. Yeah. See, I don't know. I'm very out of touch.
Man, my lawyer would be so unhappy if she knew I was talking about this now. We're working on as a project, but like we wanted to create. I mean, one of the very predictable from a behavioral, Jacob, I'm sure you'll agree, model is like when the kids have communication restricted, it tends to come out in maladaptive forms. So essentially, we have a bunch of friend-starved, friend-hungry kids on the internet, mm-hmm. which is a terrifying prospect to me because they're all just savvy enough to get themselves in trouble. So one of my staff came up with this idea, and they suggested it entirely not entirely, but like partially in jest. They weren't sure that this is a thing, and I think it was a great idea, but we established a Discord server, which is, again, it's like Slack, but for nerds. And I say that as a self-identified nerd. It's okay. But we have a Discord server where, we're getting permission slips so that students and staff, like they all have to sign a code of conduct beforehand and have, in the case of students, the parents' permission, but so that they can game together. And we put them into, the students have asked me to like start doing Let's Plays, which is bizarre, but if it's gonna help them feel more like a community, I will learn to play Minecraft while they watch.
Right, absolutely. We're actually getting quite a few questions in the chat about this, so someone saying, can you talk about social supports you're finding useful? So that sounds like one, but can you guys speak to some others?
I can say this, that Zoom definitely is an option to have your sort of son or daughter join other people to play with them together. There's so many games available online that you can play with another person. I've done it. I've done social groups via Zoom. It works out so well. It almost is, we take away all these negative components, which is fighting, bickering, throwing things. All those things are gone, and the kids are very engaged. So that's some way to address the social component of the situation.
Just to build off of what Jacob said, like one of the main ways we've always addressed it, and that is translated fairly well, ironically, as like the general populace has made the same shift. We use role-playing games as a method of social skills learning because it allows students to engage in scenarios that, force teamwork and, collaborative decision-making, and allow them to also make mistakes at one remove from themselves. So they're able to walk away from it, but still learn from it. And that has just been incredibly valuable when it comes overall, even during the school year, developing social skills. But there are some of the kids now who are leaning so far into this that they're one young lady that we work with. I actually have an appointment with her tomorrow afternoon to teach her how to start running the games on her own. But I also want to back up what Jacob said. I've been encouraging a lot of my students or my families to have Zoom play dates. Moderated, of course, because like it's the internet.
Right. So speaking of Zoom, I know one thing that has come up for us in our private discussions has been turning the camera on, turning it off, eye contact, the idea that so much nonverbal information is conveyed in person and you have to sort of work extra hard to do that on Zoom. Eye contact can be a little weird. Can you guys just comment about that, both sort of a professional and personal experiences with that? Maybe Michael, we could start with you.
Well, as I said, because I have this anecdote about it, because professionally, I'm not dealing with that as much as Brendan and Jacob are dealing, because I'm not working directly with the kids. But I think it's hard to teach eye contact over Zoom because, again, it's a computer screen. And as I explained to you, I'm using a dual monitor. So it looks like I'm not making total eye contact right now because I'm looking at the monitor you guys are on and the camera's on the other screen. So as I explain to people, it's not that I'm not making eye contact. I'm making eye contact on the dual bigger monitor, but the camera's on the other screen. So I think eye contact is one of those things that just, it's hard to teach by Zoom. And I think it's one of those things that we need to wait till we're in an in-person situation. Because right now I'm looking at Carlene's eyes, but it looks like I'm not.
No, I 100% agree with Michael. Like, as someone also on the spectrum myself, like eye contact it's an ancillary skill. It's good to have, but rather than go down that road, I can just say like mandating it or demanding it is picking the wrong battle in an environment. And as educators, our job is to pick the battles that make the most sense.
Yeah, it's interesting, Brandon, what you're saying, because we have a similar approach to eye contact. Although it's a conventional thing. We believe we should make eye contact when we talk, but it's a pick the right battle. It's difficult for these kids to do it. We cannot necessarily change them completely. Let's work on things that are more important. However, what I found is that I can work on a lot of social skills that I do not have access to outside without a computer. Like I can show them videos and point out things and circle things using the Blackboard techniques like the markers, and even show them proper body position and like I've done it today with a client where we kind of reviewed a social skills video and we stopped and we can talk about so many nuanced things because we can bring up pictures. I can bring up emotions and show them how eyes are shaped, how the mouth is shaped to express different things, which I do not normally have access to.
Jacob, can I ask a question? I know this is entirely off script, but like, have you done anything where like you draw an object and with the annotation software, like you draw like a circle and you have them put their head in the circle?
Never did that, no.
I'm just thinking about like how much, like you just inspired me because I'm like, our OT over Zoom has been really difficult by the nature of what it is. And I was like, when you said body posture, I was like, oh my God, you could draw the outline and have them line themselves up with it.
Yeah. Along those lines, we actually have a question from a speech language pathologist who's saying that in their school district, there isn't a lot of access technology for the families. There's not great Wi-Fi, and so they're having to send packets home. Do you guys have any suggestions regarding kind of non-technological based interventions? I know I have toddlers and they send some packets home, so I don't know if you guys have run into that.
Does a phone count as a technological solution in this case?
Well, I think some of the issues can be that a phone might not have might not have Wi-Fi, and so there's like a limited data plan, so there may not be so much to do with it.
Just going back to what Michael said about like you can't assess via a worksheet whether a student is able to do a thing. This is just problem solving off the cuff. But you would have a scheduled call, and the student, you could send exercises for the student. Student could practice and perform. It's different skill building in that case, but making use of all what tech is available, I think can make a huge difference. Like phone is low tech, but it still you can assess pronunciation and enunciation.
Yeah. Have you guys run into any kids who really just don't like technology? We have someone in the chat who says that their young person does not like using computers and really this is quite averse. What might you do there? Have you seen that?
Go ahead, Bren.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jacob. Why don't you go?
So I have a student that I'm working with who's very young, and obviously they don't usually engage in technology, especially Zoom, those things. What I do in such a case, I just have the parent put the iPad or whatever that is on a windowsill or something, and I observe them in the room and I make comments as they go about, and I do not necessarily require the child to be fully engaged in front of the machine. I make sure that I have a room view, and that's good enough for me. And if the child leaves the room, I make sure that it's taken to the kitchen or whatever, however that works. But I'm sure it doesn't necessarily apply to teaching. Like if you want to teach a lesson, it's probably a lot more difficult, where I cannot really relate to. I wanted for a moment to address like my kids, it's a personal thing, they do not have video classes, and they do get packets. It is very difficult. It is very, very challenging. It almost is not worth it. Like that's almost how far we go, because it requires so much from the parents to be involved. So there's a trade-off there, but depending on your child, I would say don't be hard on them. Just let them do whatever they can do. Everybody's gonna fall back the same, and we'll pick it up next year or whenever we go back to normal.
I agree wholeheartedly with Jacob's point. Like it's, we talk a lot at AU about buy-in, and it's the political capital that you have with your student or child. And one of the reasons, from an ethical perspective, we all know that dual relationships is not something you should be ever seeking to be. That being like being someone's friend and their therapist at the same time. That's a conflict of interest inherently, because therapeutic failures are not family system failures. And school failures are not parent-child failures. And so because as we mentioned earlier, so many families are not trained teachers, that pressure is unrealistic. It's like, if we couldn't do Zoom teaching, I don't know quite what we would have done, because there's not, so I will say that we have one student in particular who's younger than the rest, and I've definitely seen like the developmental difference in terms of Zoom fatigue. That's a real thing. But this particular student bottoms out at the end of the week. And, we've started sending home individualized, like you have to differentiate when that comes up. You have to give the kid materials that they can meaningfully engage with, or do limited windows. Like maybe if they can't do instructional time, I hate to go back to the same example twice, but like find the point of mutual compromise. Like what can they do? I have students that only participate in class via text. Not like text at the moment. One student did try that, but just like chat in the Zoom. Their screen's off, their mic's off. The only reason I know they're alive is they send me a message every 5 minutes. Whatever it takes to meet them where they're at.
Right. Which is so true in therapy as well, is we're trying to do that to get through to people. I'm wondering, Michael, if you could kind of piggyback on something Jacob said about some of this does seem like a bit of a lost year in some ways, and there is going to be a catch up. And what advice do you kind of have for families as an attorney about school districts doing some catch up work when we're back to whatever normal is the new normal?
Well, so first, hitting on the issue of the technology and lack of access, I think that in this day and age, a school not having the technology available could be viewed as a denial of free and appropriate public education. However, the question was asked was about the families not having it, and you can't hold the school district responsible if a family doesn't have that Wi-Fi in their house. The school can only provide the Chromebooks or the iPads, but the families still need the internet access. And that's a whole bigger policy question about giving everybody broadband access in this day and age.
Right.
That being said, I think with kids who are going to be lost or have a lost, not year, but a lost half a year, a lot of it's going to have to be made up in compensatory services later in compensatory education. In New York, we just found out today, Governor Cuomo announced there will be no summer in school, it will all be virtual, that they will not be returning to school for at least the summer. So the question we don't know is, how long is that going to be? Is that September? Is that January? Is that, who knows how long? Because unfortunately, the problem that still exists is we're all getting older while life is on hold.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is lost time for everybody. It's not like our aging freezes in place, the same with children who age more rapidly than we do. I think the issue is that there's going to have to be a lot of compensatory services later, which costs money once you can get kids and teachers and professionals back in the same place. But that's a lot of lost time to make up for, and kids who don't have those services during that time, and I think Jacob can speak to this, regress a lot. You know, when you give a kid 6 months or a year where there's less or no services, that's going to not just leave them frozen where they were before, but they're going to start regressing.
Yeah. Sounds like you're going to have your work cut out for you whenever.
Probably.
Go
And
back.
of course, those services cost money, and money is always the issue.
Yes.
Come up with our students, especially like talking to the parents. Some of the parents are worried about like future school refusal. You know, after for some of our students, it was such a battle to get them in the door in the first place. Once they got there, fine, we could keep them. They would be happy to come back. But getting them over the initial hurdle, transitioning is something that's phenomenally understated in terms of how anxiety provoking it is for people on the spectrum and adjacent. But you know, how are we going to get these kids who, you know, it doesn't take that long to establish a habit, new norm for them. I already have 11-year-olds asking about, can we do night school?
Right.
And I don't know how to respond to them, because in the current environment, you almost want to say yes if it's going to be better for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that does bring to the next question, which is, as we look ahead, I mean, nobody has a crystal ball, but what do you think when we're all kind of back to normal, what changes do you think there'll be as a result of this? I mean, it sounds like you think there'll be kids that want to just do virtual work kind of indefinitely.
I mean, absolutely. I think that, I mean, Michael referred to this before with like, there are fewer clients, like we're getting fewer applications right now. And normally like I am getting overwhelmed at this point in the year. But what I fear is that we are going to hit July and August, and the students' needs are not going to have gone away. And it's all just going to come out in a rush. So we're making contingency plans for everything right now. You know, we are a fairly small school. And so as a result, we're considering everything. I think that I am really, really hoping that we are able to get back into the school in September. But the most important thing in all of this is to make sure that whatever we're doing is following epidemiologists' best practices for group size. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure, both intentionally and unintentionally, for people who are just feeling the stress of this and want to get back to normal. Like, I already go out in Prospect Park, and every weekend there are less people wearing face masks.
Right.
I think we're almost, like, from a societal level, I think we're moving to a place where we're almost certainly going to be back in school in September, whether it's a good idea or not, at least on a society-wide level. For our own institution, we're going to do whatever epidemiologist best practices are.
Right. Any other comments, Jacob or Michael, on that subject? Kind of predicting the future.
I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Jacob.
No, go, Michael.
Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, I said I think that it's just so hard, because if they go back to school and things don't go well, in a way, I think attorneys like me are going to have to figure out how to fix it after the fact. And the problem is going to be, you know, I can't fix if this kid gets coronavirus. That's a whole nother issue. If they get coronavirus and they lose even more instructional time, the question is going to be, how do we fix it if they have to go back and shut down again? As Brendan said, you know, there's a whole larger issue that's beyond all of our control in this.
Yeah, definitely.
I think as much as we can acknowledge that in our planning, you know, to speak to it, to go back to what you said before, Michael, like IDEA hasn't changed. I know that right now there's an incredible amount of nervousness in terms of whether or not things can proceed as they have been. And it, everything I've turned up has shown that it should.
Yeah.
But I totally understand people are right to be wary, especially with the way that like the New York City system has treated families in the past.
Absolutely. Maybe that'd be a good point actually to bring up something we haven't really talked about, and I know several people missed the introductions. Maybe Michael, could you just talk a little bit, if you're comfortable, about kind of your personal journey to becoming an educational attorney and your own experiences?
Sure, I've done this a lot. So I grew up with undiagnosed, sorry, you seem excited. Grew up with undiagnosed Asperger's, didn't get an appropriate education for many years. It's all on my website and blog. People can read about it. Long story short, I got to college, caught myself up, realized all the mistakes, went to law school, and then realized I had a mission and a calling to help other children with special needs avoid some of the challenges I went through, and have become a special ed attorney, helping families avoid some of the, the system is better now, but avoiding the challenges I went through from having looked back and saying, yeah, this was wrong, this was wrong, this was wrong. And now 35, 40 years later, I tell my mother, you did this, this, and this wrong. And she's like, well, what are you going to do about it now?
I bet she's very proud. She did something right, Michael, because
Exactly.
here you are. You're such a treasure to have for families. And similarly, Brendan, I think it would be really helpful also to talk a little bit about your journey and maybe a little bit more about your school. I think I saw on your website it was a neurodiverse affirmative. Like, please just chat a little bit about what that means and how it came to be.
Well, I got diagnosed a little earlier than Michael. But for a while, the only diagnosis was problem child. So I was a District 75 student for a little while until I ran into the fact that like Stuyvesant High School didn't have a program for students with special needs. So I had to get myself decertified. I came back after college, went straight into teaching in the DOE up in the Bronx. And then after a couple of years there, I got frustrated with the limitations of like our school's mandate is to do the most good, and that was not what was occurring within the DOE. So after leaving, I started working with students in home, generally like at risk for whatever their current placement was, losing it. Doing some homeschooling and rehabilitation with students, and then in 2016, a bunch of families who'd been kicked out of the same school over the course of 2 weeks, they came together and were like, hey, teach our kids. So I kind of got shanghaied into running a school. And that was 4 years ago. And it's just kept escalating ever since. But as someone on the spectrum, like I want to run a school that would have supported me in a way that I did not get, that provides guidance. And most importantly, the reason we run from grades 2 to 8 is because we need to provide for the future. We need to plan for our students to be heading back into the world. I get asked every year to open high school, and the answer is always no. Our students need to be, as the special education system as a whole is different degrees of like almost a lab setting, right? It's not, generalization, as Jacob pointed out, is the most important thing in any sort of intervention. So we strive to have a school that is as much like a school as possible. Observationally, it looks like a small classroom school. And we plan and structure everything around teaching our students the strategies they need to succeed once they no longer need us. Our ideal world is a world in which our school is no longer necessary.
Planned obsolescence. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. How big is your school? How many students can be there?
We actually, for next year, we only have 25 seats. And that's actually our current site's capacity. So where we go from there is going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What we put a lot of work into is developing methodology and practices. And our organizational goal long term is to hopefully transmit those to the DOE in such a format so that real progress can be made.
Mm-hmm.
We have operationalized a format that does work for the kids for whom the DOE has not been able to. It's like I said before, our goal is to do the most good. So we want to make sure we perfect what we're doing and then give others the opportunity to do the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yours is a situation where families might hire an attorney like Michael to help kind of get the school paid for.
Yeah, we do. So roughly half our students are on some form of financial assistance. But you know, that people like Michael are the reason a school like mine is able to exist.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell parents you should never pay for a private school like what Brendan's doing. The DOE should be paying for it. The problem is some parents, if they can afford it, don't want to go through the hassle. But ultimately, the system relies on that. And the problem is to become what's called a state-approved school, which would mean it's simpler to get paid for. You have to go through all these hoops and paperwork that a lot of schools are actually decertifying because the bureaucracy makes it not worthwhile to be state-approved.
Wow. So does that mean, Michael, if they're decertified, that they're strictly just private pay?
Well, no, that means that you can't get it on an IEP, but you need a lawyer like me to either go to a due process hearing or negotiate a settlement to get them paid for.
Wow. Wow. What advice would you have for families who are going through that process?
My advice would be that, talk to an attorney, talk to an advocate, but to get to a due process hearing, we have you need an attorney or advocate to basically either win a hearing or to get a settlement for a school like Brendan or anything else that's not state approved.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the problem is that school districts, can't legally place these things through an IEP, and state approved doesn't mean better or worse. It just means you've gone through the state's guidelines to get certified, which again involves often a lot of paperwork. Like I said, in New York, schools are actually decertifying because of that.
Yeah. Michael, someone in the chat is asking, are you an attorney in New York only, or do you?
I practice in Connecticut as well. Through COPA, I have a network of attorneys around the nation in most states. We have people in, I think, 49 states who are doing special ed. If you're in North Dakota, I can't really help you. But any other state,
Sorry, North Dakota. Hopefully there's no one there. Yeah, and I know Michael's great about this too. Like I know I've contacted you in the past for, I have somebody in this state or that, and you've been very helpful in connecting us to the right.
I gave Carlene an attorney once in Massachusetts, which isn't that hard, but sometimes you get more obscure places. Last night, an attorney in New York, I gave a referral to a friend in LA. So we always have a network of people around the country because every state is different. And in New York, you have two separate educational systems. You have New York City and you have everything else.
Okay. We're winding down, but I am wondering what advice you guys would have for parents, kind of takeaways, parents who are kind of in the trenches now with kids.
I can go speak on that first.
Sure.
I would tell parents really to be kind to themselves. I think that's like my ultimate advice. Like, do not expect your kids to suddenly be perfect. Understand also that the way teachers deal with kids at school is by a lot of distraction and ignoring the bad behaviors. So I don't want to come across preachy, but perhaps there's no need to comment on everything. Expect them to be kids. That's how teachers engage them at school, really. They just don't comment on everything. So that's my little piece of advice there.
That's hard to do, though. I know you're a parent. Do you find that's hard to do as a parent yourself?
It is very difficult to do. It is but yeah, it's just, it requires a lot of reframing and just a lot of long, deep breaths.
Long, deep breath. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
There are a couple general strategies that I've been counseling parents in. Like I said, with the check-ins, we've been doing sort of incremental interventions. Stimulus control which is the idea that like a given object or situation controls the way that you think about something. We see a stop sign, we stop. That sort of is something we've lost in transition here. Like the stimulus control of a school is that when you arrive at school, you expect to do work. When you're at home, you expect to be engaging in home activities. Giving your student a designated workspace, and that can make an incredible amount of difference, because then that workspace becomes the discriminative stimuli for this is when I'm doing work. And sort of as much as you can create the separation for students, doing so, because I think it's incredibly valuable. And then also get outside. Vitamin D. I take a walk around the block at the least every day, just so I don't go mad. And communication, the scheduling and structure are definitively the best ways to go about making sure that normalcy is maintained. I think that when the environment now lends itself to ambivalence, consistency is key for making real progress.
Absolutely. Michael, what about you? What would you say for parents?
Well, it's funny that Brendan mentions that, because I probably should get some of that vitamin D, having been diagnosed with a vitamin D deficiency. I think the advice for parents I give is do what you can now, push the school district now, don't let them off the hook because of the pandemic, but bear in mind that some of this you're going to need later. Some of this, you're going to need compensatory services later. Some of this is not going to be remedied right now. Some of this we are going to have to wait on. It sucks. It's not fair, but it's the world we live in. And you know what? Ultimately, the school district isn't responsible for the pandemic. They have to do what they have to do, but they have to do it within a safe and legal manner.
Yeah. Well, this tolerating ambiguity, tolerating all of this is such an important skill for all of us. I think we're getting a real hard life lesson over the past several months. So, yeah.
Chaos.
What's that?
Structure and chaos.
Structure and chaos. Yes. I think we have a couple of questions in the chat that are sort of specific, but I might as well ask them as we have a couple minutes. Can you recommend an attorney in Los Angeles? Clearly there's a need for this nationwide.
I can. I don't know if I should do it here or if they should want to send an email, but I would, if they want to Google, it's called A to Z Educational Advocates in Los Angeles. And I'll look up their website as we speak. But that would be who I could recommend in LA. Their website is www.a2ZEDAD. And they're in Pacific Palisades, California.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's great to have such a wide network of people. Any final thoughts, guys? Final words as we wrap up?
No, I've had a lot of words. I don't know if I should.
They were good words though, and you had the fish, so we love that. We love the feedback fish. I think I'm gonna steal that. So, Jacob, anything?
Not much. Well, like I kind of wanted to talk on that before, but there was definitely a benefit to the situation. The fact that we're shifting to a new medium of perhaps treating our clients. So that's a benefit. That's something we can sort of harness and go forward with.
Okay. Michael, what about you?
Sorry, what was the question? I was
kind of a final word, final thought the audience should take away from today.
Just there are people out there to help you. You're not in this alone.
Great. And building off what Jacob said, just making the most of the opportunities that you have, and coming in with open expectations, reassess everything, because trying to proceed as if nothing has happened is the most likely thing come back to bite you.
Mhm.
This is new. This is different. We're all learning.
Absolutely. And hopefully people are all learning today, and we're about out of time, but thanks everyone for participating. Thanks especially to our panelists for a great discussion, and hope to see many of you back next week. We're doing these every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and check our social channels for what topics are upcoming.
Thank you.
Everyone.